Welcome to this ninth episode of the Re-Automated podcast. Today we have featuring Stuart Miller. You are the CEO of the National Robotarium, located in beautiful Edinburgh, Scotland, where you're also joining us from today. Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you, Andreas. It's good to be here.
Right. So, Stuart, looking at your career, you've spanned a long and impressive career from aerospace and defense all the way up to robotics. So, could you start off by giving us an insight into your background and how you ended up becoming the CEO at a center of robotics?
Sure. The journey to here probably started about 5 or 6 years ago, but prior to that, I've been in engineering all my career. I got very interested back in the late 70s, early 80s in microprocessors and what they could do for the world, and thought that would be a good thing for me to spend my life doing. And I've been fortunate enough to be doing that. Most of it spent in avionics and aerospace, so designing mission computers and navigation computers and that sort of thing for fast jets like Tornadoes and Harriers in the UK and F-16s, F-18s, that sort of thing. And more recently, like I say, 4 or 5 years ago, as part of my role as one of the general managers for a large part of the company I worked for, I started to get intrigued by bringing through new innovations and how companies did that properly. And at that time, there was a lot of talk around the use of agile approaches and new approaches that were coming out of the software world, and a number of different new tool sets that were coming available, etc. Cloud computing was becoming much more used in that space as well. So I got quite intrigued by that, and I got very involved in trying to understand how you take new ideas, uh, surface them in the first place, and then nurture them, and then actually turn them into something real that makes a difference. And I spent a bit of time working inside the aerospace company I worked for, looking at that. But then I had the opportunity to work as the chief technical officer at an organisation that's UK government organisation called Innovate UK, which tries to do that job at a national scale, looking across multiple sectors and encouraging entrepreneurship and business growth and innovation right across the UK landscape. So I had the privilege of doing that for just over 12 months. That involved getting involved with all the different catapults here in the UK. And then the opportunity to take up the role I'm now in as Chief Executive Officer of the National Robotarium came along. And I got involved in that at a point in September 21, where the building was just starting to be built. And I've nurtured it through the build process. And since September 22, we've been open for business, and building the team and sorting out what the right things and the value added elements that we can bring to the landscape here in the UK to try and promote the use of and development of robotics and AI.
Right. So it seems technology has always been in both the fore and the background of what you're doing, and having a passion for sharing that. So with that in mind, could you take us to Edinburgh, to the National Robotarium, and tell us about, give us an overview of the place and what its main purpose is?
In a nutshell, it's rather straightforward statement, which is try and get more robots being used more of the time. When you break that down a little bit, it's really looking at a practical way to have a positive impact on the economy by helping companies adopt robotics, or helping small companies that want to become robotics manufacturers, for example, helping them grow, while at the same time looking at a societal benefit. So trying to understand where robots can be used in society at large for benefit. And that takes us into the realms of social care and healthcare, physiotherapy, but it also overlaps with making sure that people are not being put into harmful situations. So we get involved right across a broad spectrum. Um, the tools that we use are to try and use the people and the facilities we've got here to help companies adopt robotics. So helping people that have maybe done their business in a particular way up until now, but can see the advantages of robotics, but not sure how to get started or what questions they should be asking themselves. And more importantly, if the robotic solution is likely to be bespoke or a tailoring of something off the shelf, use the engineering team that we have here to help them with that. Sitting alongside that, we try and encourage more money to go into the research base in the UK to bring through the next wave of technology and the next wave of robotics thinking. And alongside that, as I said before, we try and help what we call our resident businesses, so companies that we actually house here in the Robotarium in an accelerator fashion to help them to grow and hopefully when they leave us go into full scale production. And then alongside that, we try and make sure that uh, we're encouraging young people to look at robotics as a positive route for them as a career path, but also the public at large to understand robotics. And then finally, under that same bracket, helping companies to train their staff, be they senior managers who might have to make decisions about the adoption of robotics, but also their staff in the future that will be operating robotics and working alongside robotics. So all of those things combined is where the Robotarium really starts to add value when it finds the links between those four elements and it offers up something unique that wouldn't have come from each individually. But even if it's just in an individual of the element of the four, then we think we've got something that's wasn't here or a year and a half ago before we opened. So it's good to see that being taken up by so many people over the last 18 months.
Right, and it sounds like you have a really broad both mission and vision. It sounds like, if you're saying it's both for the student or just the public wanting to know more about robotics, but also the manufacturer looking to perhaps adopt robotics for the first time or looking for advice on how to advance their already existing use of robotics.
Yes, I mean, one of our biggest challenges is the breadth of everything that we're dealing with. So we're working across multiple sectors: agriculture, construction, healthcare, social care, manufacturing, logistics, nuclear commissioning and decommissioning, offshore wind. I
Wow.
was actually just yesterday on an offshore wind support vessel looking at how robots could assist with what they're trying to do. So across multiple sectors. But then if you add into that the various aspects of robotics and AI that we're trying to apply, all the way from drones through autonomous quadrupeds like Spot and unitary robots, that sort of thing, wheeled robots, tracked robots, and then we go into healthcare and physiotherapy and social care, and we're dealing with natural language processing and pretty much anything that that the robot technology can offer. So trying to meld those two elements together, the breadth of interest and the breadth of technological solutions, is where all the fun is. That's uh, that's what we do.
Right. And it sounds like a noble mission with enough to keep track on, if you will. And your motto is people centered and intelligence driven. Why, both for the Robotarium and you personally, why is it so important to educate on topics such as robotics and AI?
I think the importance is, if we look into the future, there's no doubt, certainly in my mind, and I think for a lot of people, if they stop to think about it, that we're moving into a phase of civilization now where we will be cohabiting with robots. The technology has moved on, the affordability is becoming acceptable, the reliability is becoming acceptable. So over the next few years, and by few years I'm talking about anywhere between 3 and 10 years, but certainly maybe even quicker, the sort of more 3 to 5 year window, we're going to see more and more robotic devices coming into our lives, whether that's the adoption of simple devices to clean floors and windows and cut our grass, that sort of thing domestically, or whether that's coming into the workplace, either to work alongside us as cobots or to be, moving things around in warehouses, or indeed in our social and public spaces when we're trying to be guided around an airport or we're looking to find a shop in a shopping mall. We'll probably find robots helping and assisting us there. And especially when we go into hospital, and increasingly probably when we are discharged from hospital, there'll be robots in our lives. So with that landscape in front of us, it's exceptionally important that people understand what robots can and can't do, not just technically and from the point of view of their capability, but also in terms of where they're going to fit into the world we're all going to live in the future. We will be a society of humans and robots side by side at some point in the future. And we should be thinking about that now and considering what that means.
Right. And would you say this growth of adopting robotics, not only in manufacturing, but across all these areas which you mentioned, would you say that's just picking up pace for every year that goes by? I mean, we're seeing obviously more cobots in factories, and if you go to the local mall here in Odense, you will see robot from mere driving around with dispensing hand sanitizer and whatnot. So is this just the beginning? Are we seeing an accelerated growth of robots in our everyday lives?
I think we are. I think the move through to autonomous systems, so robots sensing their own environment, making sense of that environment, and then acting upon what they understand, means that they're not remote controlled anymore. If when we couple that with artificial intelligence, where the robot's learning to do tasks and improving on the way it does tasks every time it does it, learning from everything that it does. So even simple things like talking to a robot and a robot responding in natural language, if that's backed up with an artificial intelligence algorithm, that robot is going to learn every time it talks and interacts and get better and better as it goes. And we're seeing that particularly in the sphere of humanoid robotic development, where the approaches now are starting to use much more training through artificial intelligence and learning through artificial intelligence, just in the same way as young humans learn through mimicry and imitation, but also through teaching. We're starting to see that come into the way that robots are developed, and I think all of those things that I've just mentioned are accelerators for robotics. And couple that with the economic necessities of them becoming affordable, and then being produced at scale, and finally, they need to be reliable. We need to know that when we use them to do the task we want them to do, that it's going to be carried out reliably each time. And I think that's come a long way over the last few years. Certainly, one of my motivations for taking up this role was that, as you mentioned, I've been interested in technology my whole career. I've followed everything from space travel and space exploration through the development of microprocessors and the robotics. Pretty much anything to do with technology, I'm very interested in. And for me, it felt that robotics is on the cusp of a breakthrough very soon. And when it does break through, we're going to find a lot of robots in our lives.
Right. And you guys opened your doors, 2 years ago. Have you been able, first of all, how's that journey been? But have you been able to see that adoption? Have you been able to see people reconcile more with robots since you opened your doors in Edinburgh?
Yes, we have. I mean, in terms of the journey, the journey's been absolutely fantastic. We've had more interest than we can cope with. We've had to rapidly grow the number of people that we employ. So after being operating for just 18 months now, almost to the day, um, we now have a staff of just over 30, 32 to be precise. Um, and we have working in the Robotarium through a mix of that staff, the researchers that are doing research work, and the resident companies that are working here. On any given day, there's between 100 and 120 people working on robotics. And to put that into context, that means that a year and a half ago, those 120 people didn't have a place like this to work in, but a lot of them were not working in robotics, and not all of them are robotics engineers. Some of them are project managers, some of them are business development, some of them are making sure the place operates smoothly, but a lot of them are robotics engineers, and there's quite a community growing here now. So it's been really exciting and interesting. We get to talk. I have the privilege now of every day getting introduced to a new challenge, a new technology, a new company, um, and that's just absolutely stimulating. And I think everyone who works here finds it that way. That on the one hand, it can sometimes be exhausting intellectually and physically. On the other hand, uh, you wouldn't want it any other way. So certainly that journey has been a really exciting and interesting one. And
Yeah,
I forgot the second part of your question.
I was just it was just how the journey had been so far, and if you had seen in this 2 year span if people had become more accepted towards
Yeah,
robotics in that
yeah.
short time window, if you've been able to see that.
Um, Probably difficult to judge because even though we've been very busy and talking to a lot of people, our sample size is probably quite small. If we were looking at, if you looked at the whole of the UK population, can I judge whether that's changed? Probably not. But what has changed, I think, is everyone that we've spoken to has gone away with a different view as to what robotics is about. And I think particularly in the last 12 months or so, when there's been a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and what that means, trying to help people to understand that the application of robotics, certainly in our view, and certainly the way we try to view it and help other people look at it in the same way, is that robotics is a very intelligent tool which we can use exactly as described as a tool. It's something there to help us to do the things that we want to do anyway, whether
Yeah.
that's to decommission a nuclear power station, which is quite relevant here in the UK at the moment, decommission a nuclear power station safely rather than putting people in harm's way, whether it's to help our elderly when they're at home on their own to feel more connected, better looked after. It doesn't really matter what the application is. I think we should be viewing robotics, and if we just take AI on its own, similarly, should be viewing them as assistants and helpers and tools that we can use rather than worrying about, sci-fi visions of the future.
Yeah, how often do you have to, combat the notions of either the Terminator future or the robots are here to steal our jobs?
Just about every minute of every day. Um, I think I'm a great sci-fi fan as well. So sci-fi's quite often led the way in terms of fiction becoming fact. But I think in this respect, it's wide of the mark. Um, I don't think we've got anything to fear from robotics. Uh, we may have a little bit more to fear from AI, but not AI in robotics, more AI in terms of it doing things like deep fakes and things like that. But I think when we talk about robotics and when we talk about AI coupled with robotics, um, we have a choice about how we use that. And I think it's important, going back to your earlier point, it's important that people have enough information and understanding of robotics and AI to make a decision for themselves. So there will come a point, I'm sure, when our politicians and our society as a whole are discussing exactly where we want to go with robotics. And it would be good to think that we could play some part here in the Robotarium in helping them understand what it's all about so they can make informed decisions for themselves rather than be led by lurid headlines or sci-fi.
And I think that's an excellent point that goes, beyond robotics, but, having people have their own opinions and base their facts on that. So
Yeah.
if we zoom out a little from Edinburgh, Stuart, but we stay in the UK, what would you say are the main opportunities and challenges as positioning the UK and maybe Scotland in particular as a leader in robotics and AI?
We're starting from a very low base. We don't really have any robotics manufacturers to speak of, uh, comparing with Denmark, for example, but also comparing with many other countries. So, when studies are done and league tables drawn up, then the UK, in terms of being a manufacturer of robotic systems, is well down that league table in the high 20s and early 30s in terms of the ranking. So that's pretty poor. Alongside that, when we look at the adoption and use of robotics in our industry, we're also very low down those league tables. Um, and we could probably be here for a week discussing why that's the case in both instances. What we've been set up to do is to try and reverse that trend and try and accelerate a move. I often talk about bootstrapping or leapfrogging. We don't necessarily have to take every step that other countries have taken to get where they are right now. We can jump. We can jump a few steps. So we're trying to make our UK industry aware of robotics and what it can do for them, and trying to de-risk that so that they can adopt it easily and take it on. Well, at the same time, as I said earlier, we're trying to help those companies that want to create new robotic solutions to be successful and start to build up the opportunity of manufacturing robotics in the UK. It'll take a little bit of time and probably needs more than just one Robotarium to make it happen. But we're on that route now. And like I say, 18 months ago, we weren't taking a single step forward because we hadn't designed the shoes, if I can use that analogy.
Right. So you're hoping what you're doing at the Robotarium could be a blueprint, if you will, for further introducing robotics and technology across the UK.
I'd like to think so. Yes, I think the coming together of research, industry, startup companies, um, and the further education sector, the schools as well as further education, is powerful. But most importantly, having places that can make that happen and having the facilities to allow that to happen, whether that's just meeting rooms and desk space for people to come together, but in the case of robotics, also having the capability to build and test and demonstrate robotics for specific customers or just generally, I think is really important. And we can do a certain amount with the team that I've got, and we can grow that team by a certain amount. But it would be better if we were looking across the whole of the UK and thinking about, well, why don't we take the good things that are happening up in Edinburgh and dot them around the country?
Right. Well, it sounds like with the job you're already doing, you're going to be successful on that path. So,
Hopefully.
Stuart, you already kind of touched upon it, but researching for this episode, we were surprised to learn, the UK ranked so low in the robot density, somewhere in the 20s and 30s, like you said. I believe it's around 101 robot per 10,000 workers. If we just return to that, because, historically speaking, the UK has always been a proud manufacturing place. But why do you think the UK has been lagging behind, if you will, in catching up and adopting automation?
It's difficult to put a finger on it. I think there's more than one cause, that's for sure. Exactly what is it's some mix of um, manufacturing companies in the UK not being willing to invest their capital, the capital investment in new equipment in robotics. That could be because they've got lots of other demands just to modernize and moving to robotics. It just isn't affordable yet. On the other hand, it could be that they didn't understand the advantages of robotics and that using robotics would have been a better option than maybe going from a 20-year-old machine to a new machine that just does the same thing. Um, it's difficult to judge. I know some surveys have been done, but even those are a little bit unclear. Uh, but the root cause is a financial one. Having worked in business for over 40 years, you sit in a boardroom and you're always asking the question, where's the opportunities? And for those opportunities, what's the return on investment? And then you're asking about the investment. So if you can afford the investment and the return looks good and the opportunity looks solid, then you're going to go off and get it done. Um, for some reason, robotics hasn't been hitting that sweet spot up until now. And as I said before, that's one of the things we're hoping to do is to help companies reappraise the benefits of robotics, create a return on investment calculation that makes sense for them so that they do start to adopt robotics. But there's also another element, which maybe we'll come back to later, which is domestic and consumer robotics, which will doesn't tend to get measured at the moment, but I think is going to be a massive growth area throughout the world. Um, I know you talked about opportunities. I think that could be an opportunity for the UK, and that's what I was getting at. One of the things I was getting at when I talked about leapfrogging and bootstrapping. Maybe we don't have to become competitive in the manufacturing robotics sphere. Maybe we delve into the rapidly growing domestic or commercial robotics use.
Right. And before we zoom out to the global perspective, if you will, Stuart, if you had a local UK manufacturer come visit you at the Robotarium in Edinburgh, and he said, "Look, Stuart, I've been thinking about robotics, but I just can't see the financial, return on investment. It's too much of a barrier for me." What would you tell him?
Um, I would probably help them to understand all of the benefits of robotics. I think sometimes the comparison that's made is not the right one. So the comparison that's often made is I could get a human to do this job and it costs me X per year. If I buy a robot, how many years of not having a human will result in me getting to break even point? I think that's not only overly simplistic, I think it's just the wrong comparison. Um, Introducing a robot to your business, one doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to replace a human. It may be that it gives you additional capacity um, so that you can open up new markets and you can produce more product. But it also brings with it a number of secondary benefits in terms of repeatability and reliability, working in around the clock, all kinds of other things. One of the things that we're seeing in some of the more enlightened conversations that we're having is the benefits of robotics in terms of carbon footprint and net zero. Um, so, for example, not having to heat or light the area that the robot's in. And then, secondly, in terms of bringing back on shore some parts of a product supply chain that may have been offshored in the past, and that in turn reduces carbon footprint overall across the full supply chain, but it also increases reliability of supply because you're in control of it. And I think a simple, a person doing the job costs this, a robot costs this to buy and this to run is not the equation. There's also another slight element to that, which is helping them to understand the peripheral requirements for operating a robot. So, for example, if you're using an autonomous robot and it's battery powered, and you want to use it on a consistent basis and not wait for the batteries to recharge every time they go down, you are going to have one or more batteries on charge all the time. So not many companies have even thought that little bit through. Your Wi-Fi coverage, the cybersecurity of that Wi-Fi coverage, again, not very rarely thought through properly. So what we try to do, and we're about to launch in a few months' time, is a robotics health check for companies to allow them to assess themselves, to see one whether robotics opens up new opportunities for them or solves problems, but two, how ready they are for the adoption of robotics, in order to help them appreciate both the opportunity and the de-risking that will be required for them to get started.
Right, and I think that sounds like an awesome tool. So can I give them a sense of where they are in the process of being able to adopt automation?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So if we zoom out, we've zoomed out from Edinburgh to Scotland. Now we want to zoom out to the whole world and actually zoom in on the US, because on the last episode of this podcast, our regular host Chris Savoya talked with Mr. Graham McPherson from a local manufacturer called Go Fast Campers up in Montana in the US, and they manufacture these awesome tent beds which you can mount on your truck.
Mhm.
And he made the point, well, he made several good points. One being through automation, they were able to raise their minimum wage from around, I think it was $12, $13 to in the 20s, right? Through automation and adopting them to CNC machines. But he also made the point that we can't afford to have made in the US of A being a luxury, and made the point that applies for all countries. And I think we've prepared a little clip here, which I'll have Morten behind the buttons play if it works. Okay, it's not playing. Okay. I cannot see it on my board. No. Okay. Well, I suppose I'll just have to paraphrase. But essentially, the point that he's making is, we can afford to have the US have made in the USA be a luxury applies really to all countries, and it's not from a political standpoint, which you would probably imagine or think. And we'll just add the
Mhm.
clip in post here. But it's more from an economic, like you already talked about. It's about keeping your supply chain local, and it's about keeping your talent local so that they add value to the local community. And I mean, you already kind of touched upon this, but what are your thoughts? Do you agree on this notion of keeping manufacturing local and the benefits which it provides?
I do. I think there's another aspect as well. So just to pick up on that first one, I think whether using robotics or not, particularly when we're looking at trying to save the planet and keep the effects of climate change down, then reducing carbon footprint, not having goods and services goods in particular go all around the world, um, is going to have to be the way we go in the future. We can't continue shipping things all around the world, and in some cases going backwards and forwards across the world as they go through their life cycle. So um, I think increasingly as countries try to hit their net zero commitments that they're making, they're going to find that they're going to have to find mechanisms to encourage their industry to manufacture locally and try and keep the carbon footprint down. Um, I also think that the second thing is, I think as more and more countries adopt robotics, automation in general, but robotics as part of that, we're going to see a bit of a leveling up or down, depending on which way you want to look at it, in terms of a lot of things move to different parts of the world, whether that was China, Taiwan, etc., for manufacturing, because the labour was cheap. Um, to some extent, that's been levelled out a little bit as those economies have started paying, have got healthier and started paying more to their workers. But I think an even greater leveler is going to be the introduction of, large volumes of robotics, because at that point, you're not differentiating on the cost of labour, you're differentiating on the quality of the product and maybe even the carbon footprint that goes with that product. I was talking to a company last week who were explaining to us that they are being motivated to look at the carbon footprint not only of their own operations but their whole supply chain in order to meet the targets that they've set for themselves, but also to ensure that in future they're not going to be heavily taxed as a result. So I think that whole movement is going to push people to think about local. But on the same token, it's a good idea. Why did we stop doing local? We used to do local. Why did we stop doing that? Mainly a race to low cost. And maybe the balance is going to change now, low cost and carbon footprint. And maybe low cost is really not that big a differentiator in the future if we've all got the same level of automation and robotics.
Yeah, and I think that's one of many excellent points of how robotics, will change jobs for the better. So over here at UR, our primary focuses are manufacturing based, such as palletizing and welding. But obviously, robotics is so much more than that, and we're seeing partners come up with awesome and creative solutions in health and construction and agriculture, topics you already kind of touched upon. And we know you're also very focused on these industries over at the Robotarium. So, how would you say that robotics has already impacted these industries?
As you would expect, it varies from industry to industry. I think all of them are starting to dip their toe in the robotics pond and trying to understand what it means for them. I think a lot of industries, particularly agriculture, retail, hospitality, and construction, certainly in the UK, have been hit by labour shortages. We hear that all the time from our politicians and from our business leaders, that if only they had more people, they could get on and get more done. Um, I think that's a massive macroeconomic driver for the adoption of robotics. And that's going to see us introducing robotics in a much wider range of applications beyond just manufacturing and warehouse logistics. We're going to see, and we're already seeing the green shoots of this in a number of different areas, particularly around agriculture. We're starting to see, fruit picking robots, weed detecting robots, weed spraying robots, crop health monitoring robotics, robotic tractors, robotic combine harvesters. So there's a lot that's happening in that sector, just as an example. But even in construction, robotics is starting to find its way into that industry as well. So I think it's permeating into everything, like I said before, and it's just more sort of um, illustration of the fact that robotics is a wave that's coming and is going to make a big difference over the next few years.
Right, and say you're doing something, very manual, like being the nurse or the carpenter. How do you reckon their jobs are going to change in the future with this increased adaptation of automation?
I think they're going to all end up with assistants. I don't think they're going to be replaced, um, particularly in roles of like the job of a nurse, which involves a lot of emotional intelligence. Um, but even in taking your example of carpenter, um, I think what you're going to find is that we're going to have a society in the future where a lot of roles are done by humans and robots working in cooperation, working side by side. Nursing assistants that are doing some of the nurse's jobs, but not all of a nurse's job, and allowing the nurse to concentrate on those higher value, higher impact things that a nurse can deliver. spending more time with the patients and not having to run around trying to find drugs in drugs cupboards, for example, or uh, go off and find medicines and equipment, but actually having been able to dispatch a robot to go and find that for them while they continue at the bedside of the patient. That's what the patients want. I'm sure it's what the nurses want. So I think changing the roles in that respect, but not undervaluing or replacing what they're doing. And again, manual tasks. I can see in the future robots holding workpieces while humans carry out more intricate tasks, and robots doing the more repeatable, straightforward work. But then the finishing tasks and the real added value, the artistry, coming from the human operator. And I know some AI stuff has been really impressive in terms of artistry, but it tends to be a little bit more mimicry than creation, absolute creativity. But maybe that'll come in the future. In fact, I'm pretty sure it will actually.
That's a really good point. So, Stuart, before we head into our rapid fire question, I have a final question for you. I mean, based on this talk and your resume, you're obviously a very wise and experienced man in the fields of robotics and AI. And what advice would you give to professionals and entrepreneurs looking to make their mark in these fields?
I think both for those who are looking for a career in robotics, but also for those that are not specifically looking for a career in robotics, but as I've said before, will be impacted by robotics, get to understand it, get to understand the technology, but also get to understand what it's capable of doing now and in the future, and become master of it. There's a lot of the time the discussions that we have here at the National Robotarium with customers, with startup companies, etc., revolve around the the view of robotics as something that helps us to get things done that we were planning to do anyway, but that allows us to do it in a safer way, or allows us to do it in a less boring way, or allows us to do it in a quicker and more efficient and cost-effective way. But we're really, the robotics that we're going to design, even the AI-enabled super intelligent robotics, is unlikely to be telling us what the next thing is to do. We're going to be deciding what needs to be done and using those as assistants, helpers, tools, intelligent machines that we can harness to achieve that. And I think if you look back in technology in general, that's what we do. Whether it's the introduction of laptop computing, mobile phones, and mobile phones are mobile computers now that sit in your pocket. So, or whether you go far enough back and you look at the introduction of the car replacing the horse,
Yep.
we embrace these technologies as human beings. We find ways to use them to do the things we want to do, to allow us to achieve what we want to achieve. And that's what pushes society and human endeavour forward. If we were still all riding around on horses, I'm quite sure we wouldn't be anywhere close to where we are now in the 21st century. So we're always building on these technologies. And the important thing is, as many of us as possible, one, understand the context of the adoption of these technologies within what we want to do as a civilization, and that some of us really concentrate on mastering these technologies and using them for good applications, like helping elderly at home, or ensuring that patients get better and quicker in hospitals.
Excellent. I think that's a beautiful, conclusion to the whole talk we just had. And to kind of turn up the pace here on the re-automated podcast, we like to end on what we call rapid fire questions. We want your initial gut reaction, first thing that comes to mind. So, you ready for that final round?
Sure, fire away.
Excellent. Stuart, what book are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading a spy thriller by an author called Nick Herron.
Nice. And do you usually read spy thrillers or more robotics related or?
I actually tend to alternate between spy thrillers, sci-fi, and biographies and autobiographies.
Sounds like a healthy rotation. So, Stuart, if you could automate anything, what would you automate?
Probably unloading the dishwasher. My wife, if she was here, would say the ironing. And I think
Maybe.
actually, there's something in those answers in terms of where we're going to end up using robotics in the home. Not just those applications, but I think the demand domestically is going to be quite high. But yeah, if I didn't have to empty the dishwasher, that would be nice.
So you reckon future generations will look at pictures of us in the history books and go, "Wow, they had to unload them themselves"?
Yeah. Well, actually, if you think it through, what they'll be saying is, why did they have dishwashers? Because we've got robots washing them by hand now,
Excellent point.
using less energy and less water.
Right. And next question, Stuart. What is Scotland's best invention? The telephone, the television, or penicillin?
Television.
That came pretty fast. No
Yeah,
doubting there.
yeah.
Why the
Well,
television?
because if you look at the impact that television's had, um, you know, we're sitting here at the moment talking to each other using an online form of television. So it's even spawned other technologies. And I think its ability to connect to so many people. I found that, when I look back on my in my involvement with television, it's been a method to educate. It's opened up the world with travel programs and all sorts of things without me having to go there. So I think television, in its best sense, broadens the mind. I think it stimulates the mind and it entertains when you want to be entertained. Um, and I think the technology that was behind it has then allowed us to do things like desktop computing, originally with CRTs, etc. But just the technology of being able to take pictures that move and transmit them around the globe is just, I think, of those three that you mentioned, is the technology, and probably of all technologies, to be honest.
Right. And I find that's very profound take on it. I suppose I will feel less of a guilt watching Netflix tonight then. And final question, Stuart. Who would you like to hear on this podcast in the future?
um, I think it would be interesting to hear a politician's view of the future, to get an idea of how they're looking at robotics, if that, and wherever they came from. It'd be interesting to see just what kind of take there is coming from the decision makers and the lawmakers that we've got.
Excellent. And finally, where can we go to learn more about you and the National Robotarium in Edinburgh?
Um, well, we try and make sure that we're easy to contact. So we have a website. If you just search for the National Robotarium, you'll find us. We've got a LinkedIn page. Again, search for the National Robotarium. We've got an X feed. Again, search for the National Robotarium. And we're on YouTube. Search for the National Robotarium.
We'll be sure to go check it out. Stuart Miller, thank you so much for joining us today on the 9th episode of the Re-Automated podcast, and have an awesome weekend.
Thanks, Andreas. It flew by. Thank you very much.